measurement, exactly.
So, well, Ambassador, thank you very much for making the time to be with us, and I expect we may have some late arrivals, but let's get started. We're very pleased at New America to welcome Ambassador Saran to this roundtable discussion, and pleased as well that he's agreed to speak on the record, and look forward to his comments and your questions, and we'll make this as informal as possible, take advantage of the time. Obviously, there's a lot in the news. The ambassador probably doesn't need much introduction to you, but he, of course, in his long, distinguished career in the Indian Foreign Service, reached the highest levels that such a career offers, serving as Foreign Secretary between 2004 and 2006, and played a very important role in shaping the strategic partnership between the United States and India that was forged during that time and through the civil nuclear cooperation deal, as well as in many other sectors. He has been Prime Minister Singh's principal representative on climate change negotiations, and the breadth of his experience is truly global. And so I hope that we'll talk about more than Abad, as the day goes along. But I do think it seems like a pretty good place to start. I'll just ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to the group. Obviously, India has had long and frustrating experience about the question of whether or not the Pakistani state, to what extent the Pakistani state should be held accountable for the militant leaders that find refuge on its soil. The typical Pakistani defense is we have a limited capacity. We are trying to do the best we can. Our laws and our intelligence collection is not the omniscient force that you critics seem to think it is, and so forth. So you have to accept that our capacity is limited. And so now the United States finds itself in a position that is familiar to India. The circumstantial evidence suggests, certainly begs the question of whether the state was complicit in any way, or sections of the state, elements of the state, and that's another complicating factor. The Pakistani state is not a unified entity. The civilian-military divide has been a feature of the country's politics for a long time. So with that, how do you assess the particular evidence that has been presented in public so far about the circumstances in which Osama bin Laden was hiding? And what conclusions did you reach in your years at the highest levels of India's government about how to think about the Pakistani state's relationship with the refuge that such leaders, whether they were Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed or others, occasionally seem to find in Pakistani cities?
Well, thank you, Steve, and very happy to be here this afternoon. I had hoped that I can get away from Abbottabad and
you will soon. And then one more question.
Focus attention more on what I believe is a very important challenge for India, and which is how does it manage its South Asian periphery? Because I do very strongly believe that unless India does a better job of managing its South Asian periphery, any ambitions to play a more constructive regional role or any kind of a global role will always face a major constraint. And we look upon our relationship with Pakistan in that broader context. And this, you may have seen this sentiment expressed by no less a person than Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh himself, that while I do not have the mandate to change borders, but I certainly do have the mandate to try and make the frontiers, not only with Pakistan, but with the rest of our South Asian neighbors, as relevant as possible, so that there is a free flow of goods, of peoples, of ideas, celebration of cultural affinities. That is the sort of vision that at least he has. And in that, of course, the relationship with Pakistan is a very critical element, because Pakistan is one of the most important countries in the subcontinent. There is no illusion in India that we can perhaps, in the foreseeable future, establish a friendly relationship with Pakistan. But certainly there is a expectation that we may be able to establish a manageable relationship with Pakistan. And in trying to establish that kind of a practical, pragmatic, manageable relationship, as I said, of course, the key element is what is Pakistan's attitude with respect to the whole aspect of terrorism. And in that context, what has happened recently, for us, number one, it is a vindication, I think, of our long-held view that there cannot be a segmentation of the so-called war against terrorism. We sometimes feel that there has been perhaps an assumption in this country that there is a kind of a order of ranking that Al-Qaeda for the United States of America is the key group to be targeted, but maybe we need not be so deeply concerned about some of the other groups, particularly groups which may be largely or who have a history of targeting India, like Lashkar or Jaish-e-Mohammed. And our argument always has been that that would be a very big mistake to make that assumption. We have always said that there has been actually enough evidence that there is a network amongst these groups, including Al-Qaeda, and that you cannot really deal with one without dealing with the others. And what has emerged now is, I think, vindicates that, because there has been a sense here that Pakistan is being helpful in our war against Al-Qaeda. It has provided intelligence. It has supported our logistics in dealing with this. We can understand why they may have some ambivalence with regard to Taliban. They may have some ambivalence with regard to some of the other groups because of the India factor. And if only India were a little more accommodating, then maybe things would have changed. I think this shows that those assumptions were wrong. Whether there was complicity or there was a failure of intelligence, frankly speaking, I think if you ask anyone in India, they would say, somebody living there for 5 years or 6 years, with a intelligence agency which has a tremendous reputation, with an army which has a tremendous reputation, it is doubtful that there would be intelligence failure. It's more. And the circumstantial evidence, as you said, points in that direction. Now, having said that, how do we see the aftermath of this?
Right.
We believe that this does provide, in my view, an opportunity as well. Because I think this is perhaps in an order which is very different from say the A.Q. Khan affair, or the Kasab affair with respect to the Mumbai attack. In this particular case, it is very difficult for Pakistan to whatever may be the reality. The perception is that this has crossed a certain line. And the international opinion, not just what the United States of America thinks or not what just India thinks, but I think overall international opinion has turned in a very negative direction. Now, will therefore the lesson drawn from this in Pakistan would be that perhaps the strategy which has been followed so far, which has perhaps even in the eyes of many of our Pakistani friends has been a successful strategy of a low cost, low risk kind of war, a cross-border war. Perhaps now there would be a sense that it is no longer low cost and low risk. And if there is therefore a willingness to look at a change, a review of this strategy and a change in this strategy, I think that would create, in our view, an environment for a more realistic and a more honest sort of peace process between India and Pakistan. I think certainly the United States of America has today a huge leverage that it has gained as a result of the Abbottabad incident, and whether it will use that leverage to nudge Pakistan in that direction, to in fact encourage that kind of a review of strategy, or whether it may settle for a more short-term approach. That is, how can we bend Pakistan to our immediate aim of, say, for example, blunting the spring offensive right now, so that one can claim that if we are not winning the war against Taliban, we have turned things around. Right. Yes, we can now take back, say, 10,000 troops or 20,000 troops. I mean, that would be a huge political gain on top of what is being gained today. Would the U.S. settle for that? Sometimes from the past experience.
Let me jump in because I think you've identified a tension, of course, in U.S. policy between short-term security imperatives and long-term transformation in Pakistan, and to some extent that tension seems likely to continue. The U.S. has been engaged in a strategic dialogue with Pakistan around various, perhaps more carrots than sticks from India's perspective, but an effort to try to persuade the Pakistan military to change its strategy in the way that you're describing. And you could argue, looking back over that whole effort of the last 2 years, that it just hasn't worked. And countries do have a funny way of deciding for themselves what they think their interests are, even when they're misguided in doing so. And so it brings me back to your comments about India's own strategy for the periphery and Pakistan, the context you set earlier. And I wonder, what is India's best strategy for creating conditions in which Pakistan evolves into a state that presents a more manageable partner for India? And is economic integration still, as it has been in Prime Minister Singh's visioning of this, is it still the most plausible path to create almost a kind of rising tide of change inside Pakistan, or does it have to be concentrated, this policy, on the conduct of the military and the intelligence service that have run this misguided strategy?
We can run no strategy with respect to Pakistan without carrying the people of India with us. So yes, Prime Minister Singh would be very keen to establish cross-border economic linkages. That is part of the approach that we have already announced. And in fact, there is considerable amount of trade taking place between India and Pakistan even today, even though there are still a number of restrictions, both on the side of Pakistan and some on the side of India, although we have been willing to provide non-reciprocal concessions and advantages. So it's not that we are somehow holding back on the economic and trade linkages. But having said that, that is not the only thing which matters. So if there is, say, a Mumbai type of attack, to say, well, focus attention on the economic side, this is something that you have to just accept that this will happen. I'm afraid that cannot be the case because we are a democracy, we are an open country, and public opinion is very important. And anyone who was in India around the time of the Mumbai incident will know how much political capital the Prime Minister had to expend to keep the anger and the desire for retaliation in check.
Right.
So that is also a reality.
Right.
And if we are talking about, you have tried all this, but Pakistan has this particular perspective, and this is how it looks at its security imperatives. One can deal with security concerns or anxieties in a rational way. But if we are talking about a certain kind of paranoia, no matter what you do, you cannot deal with paranoia.
Right. So what, just to finish this line of questions, some colleagues from Washington here with us, what if the United States were to choose to follow what I took to be your implicit advice, which would be to emphasize the leverage, to use the leverage that this week's news has created to try to create long-term change in strategy and thinking, to put pressure in that direction rather than to settle for short-term security gains around the spring offensive or some such. What specifically would be your advice to the United States that it should actually undertake in its bilateral relations with Pakistan to achieve that change, that objective? What are the levers that you would recommend the United States pull? Should we threaten sanctions? Should we link aid to specific changes? Should we set up metrics about how many cross-border incidents there are, or how many groups of how many terrorist leaders are still at large? I mean, what specifically should the United States do that it's not doing?
How the United States can implement the sort of policy that I'm talking about is really for the U.S. to decide. I don't think we can be quite prescriptive in terms of these are the kind of benchmarks that you should set in place. That's for the U.S. To determine. But I think what we would certainly hope that the United States recognizes is that so far the evidence would appear to show that there is been no alignment of strategic interests between Pakistan and the United States with respect to, for example, Afghanistan. That is the ground reality. So first of all, you have to come to terms with that. I mean, to somehow or the other say, well, it's because of India that there is a problem in Afghanistan, or it is because of India that there is a problem of terrorism. This, I think, is a rather easy way out to sort of put this kind of explanation out. So I would hope that there is a recognition of what that reality is, and then I think India and the United States of America can perhaps sit down together and see what can be done, which would require a certain response from India as well. I grant that entirely, which is one of the reasons why the reaction to what has happened has been somewhat muted in India. There has not been any threat to sort of disrupt the dialogue process, which has been recently put in place, or to stop the exchanges, whether it is on the economic side or on other functional areas. So we are keeping that door open precisely because we think that maybe embarrassing as it may be for our Pakistani friends, it is a humiliation. We grant that, but rather than paint Pakistan into a corner, perhaps this also provides some kind of an opening. Whether Pakistan will take advantage of that opening, that is their decision, not really the decision on the Indian side. And yes, I think, as I said, the United States will have an important role to play.
Yeah. And so that's a good basis for a transition into a little bit of discussion before we open it to the group about the U.S.-Indian relationship. If an opportunity here is for the United States and India to collaborate more realistically and more deeply around regional challenges such as the war in Afghanistan, it will, of course, test the current strength and nature of the U.S.-India partnership. And in that respect, I imagine as you've visited Washington, you've probably heard a question or two that makes reference to the Indian government's decision in its review of its big fighter strike aircraft purchase to set the U.S. bid aside, which is obviously a technical decision recommended by the Air Force, not by the Foreign Ministry or the Prime Minister. But it does raise a broader question about the U.S.-Indian defense relationship and the basis for shared strategy and collaboration over the next 5 or 10 years. My impression is that the Pentagon remains very enthusiastic about that partnership, sees it concentrated more in naval cooperation perhaps than in other areas, but that is generally enthusiastic about where it's going. But my question for you is from an Indian perspective, and in reference to, for example, the decision to forswear this big defense purchase with the United States for now, what is the purpose and the value of defense cooperation with the United States? What is, from India's perspective, what does India want to see emerge from this cooperation over the next 5 to 10 years that will serve its interests and ambitions in the region or in Asia or in the Indian Ocean or globally? So how would you, from first principles, describe the objectives of this partnership over the next 5 or 10 years?
As you said, at least the Indian government has made it clear that the choice of the MMRCA is really a technical choice. I think the whole point about opening up a defense relationship with the United States or with Europe, with Israel, in addition to the lines which are open with Russia, has been that we should have choice. That from a situation where you did not have much choice, if you are able to move to a situation where you have greater choice, so that what you are able to choose or select is what suits your forces the best in terms of its requirements, that is what we have been looking for. Mm-hmm. So the relationship with the United States of America does not mean that having moved from a situation of not having much choice in one phase,
you're talking about the Soviet dependency, right?
To move to a situation where you don't have much choice in terms of the supply relationship with another country. Mm-hmm. I don't think that is what India has been looking for. So I think the U.S. also needs to respect the fact that we will make choices according to how we see our interests, but there are a number of areas where we already have been working together with the United States. And don't forget that we have had to overcome a very negative legacy of several decades in the relationship. The defense relationship is only about 6 or 7 years old. And if you are looking at the manner in which the two armed forces have been working together, there has been a sea change. In terms of the number of naval exercises that have been carried out, or in terms of the cooperation between the two sides, in terms of counterinsurgency, warfare. I think the U.S. sends people to our counterinsurgency school in Mizoram to train together with Indian forces. So if you look at the past history and you look how far we have traveled in the last few years, actually it has been a very significant change. And even as far as hardware is concerned, after all, India has purchased a number of very important items from the United States recently, the maritime surveillance aircraft or the Globemaster, C-130. There are some other supplies which are in the pipeline. So I think to somehow evaluate the India-US defense relationship through the prism of one contract, I think is not very fair. So I think this is a work in progress. As the two countries learn to be more comfortable with one another, as the relationship proceeds further, there are more personal contacts. There is a greater familiarity in India with the kind of technology which the United States has, what kind of conditions it comes with. This relationship.
So one of India's objectives in defense strategy over the next 5 or 10 years is to take advantage of the choice that it is constructed for itself in the post-Cold War relationships that it's building. But I circle back to the question, from India's perspective as an architect of the U.S.-India relationship in its recent phase, what is India's objective in defense cooperation with the United States when it looks out over the next 5 or 10 years? What would success look like, or what are the areas where India thinks defense cooperation with the United States can bring benefits?
Defense cooperation can only be a part and parcel of a larger strategic relationship. So you cannot take defense relationship as something divorced from that larger relationship. So as the larger relationship unfolds, and as I said, there is greater comfort in dealing with one another, I would imagine that defense cooperation will proceed in parallel with that strengthening of the relationship. I think the United States of America will have to somehow adjust to the fact that in India you are not dealing with an ally. You are dealing with a partner. So if the expectation is that, because we are strategic partners, it means that on each issue that I consider important, you should be on the same side as us. I think that will be an unrealistic expectation. What would be a realistic expectation is that there may be a large set of issues, a broader strategic picture of the global situation as it is emerging, and there is, I certainly believe very strongly that there is greater convergence in the interests of the United States of America and in India than there are points of divergence. So that balance is to us is very obvious. So when we are looking at, for example, the future, and I mentioned this in the Brookings yesterday, that the Indian certainly view of the United States is that yes, there may be a relative decline in terms of the influence of the United States, but the United States for the foreseeable future will remain a preeminent power. Preeminent power both as far as the economic power is concerned as well as military power is concerned. If there is any of the advanced industrialized countries who have the capacity to bounce back from the crisis, we believe that it is the United States of America which probably will be able to bounce back. It has all the ingredients. Whether the political situation in the United States of America itself will allow that happen, that's not our choice. But certainly the ingredients for that comeback are all there in place. And therefore, to us, it makes sense to have a much stronger partnership with the United States. It's not only in terms of defense, but it's in terms of how we see India evolving in the next 20 years, 30 years as a major industrial power and as a major technological power. So there are many points where things are actually already in place in the relationship. They may not be as sexy as the Indo-US civil nuclear deal or the MMRCA contract, but there are a lot of other things which are taking place which are very important for the future.
Well, so my very last question, I'll throw it open to the group. If I had asked that question about the purpose of defense cooperation to a Pentagon official, I don't know whether they would have said it on the record or not, but I think the answer would have been probably the greatest area of strategic convergence that matters to us is in Asia, is in the Indian Ocean, is thinking about the nature of what Asia is going to become as China and India grow over the next 20 or 30 years. So we want an Asia of free commerce, of free oceans, of free trade, of security for all, of diverse nations maintaining their integrity and their independence and so forth. And that's in our interest, that's in India's interest, and that brings us together in the Indian Ocean and in other spaces of sort of strategic importance to Asia's future. And yes, there are many other sources of convergence in our interest, but that's the fundamental one. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would say it is certainly one of the most significant components of how we in India see the relationship. So, but to say that is the only aspect which is considered important by India, I don't think that would be the case. Yes, the naval maritime cooperation is very important because as our own engagement with the rest of the world and with the rest of Asia increases, importance of safeguarding the sea lines of communication will be very important. We know that the United States of America considers that very important. We believe that even the Chinese consider that very important.
We hope
so. Whether or not we can, whether or not we can construct some kind of a architecture for this region, which is what we say inclusive, which is transparent, where countries in the region can work together, have well understood codes of conduct with respect to the behavior of their maritime forces. This is something in which the United States of America will have to play a very important role. And as far as capabilities are concerned, I think since the time when we started actually working together, which was when I was Foreign Secretary, we had the aftermath of the tsunami, and the Indian Navy played an important role despite the fact that we ourselves were affected by the tsunami. That is when we actually started working very closely together with the U.S. Naval Forces, and also not just the U.S. Naval Forces, but with the Japanese, with the Australians. And that is the basis on which a lot of new arrangements have emerged, which we consider very positively. And the United States, of course, is a very key partner in that.
Good. Thank you. So let me invite questions from anyone. You don't even have to turn your card up. You can just ask a question. Patrick?
Sorry. I'll start off with a great range of questions going through my mind. First one out will kind of reflect some of your earlier comments. Steve asked, what would be your advice to the United States in terms of how to effectively shape Pakistan's options towards a more constructive end state. I want to take another cut at the question, but by asking you about how you evaluate Pakistan's potential countermeasures to American pressure. If American pressure is going to be potentially in the form of either military assistance or economic assistance and the rationing of that, as well as potentially some more types of limited tactical operations like we just saw. It seems as though there are three large bins of Pakistani countermeasures. One is transit into Afghanistan, cutting off supply chain. Another is falling back on their Chinese relationship for economic support, potentially increased military support. And then the third, most troubling, is a more desperate move by two, allowing some such type of encroachment on India's territory to happen, to distract the region and change the conversation. How do you evaluate those? Because I think that's going to be what American policymakers are going to be calculating. How do you evaluate those? Are we missing, in those three, are we missing any major ones? And how would you, to what extent can India help to create an environment, even if it's indirectly and not in coordination with Washington directly, per se, but to make sure that such a longer-term transformation can carry forward, given those three fairly robust countermeasures?
Each of the three items that you mentioned, each of them is a risk. So, I don't think that any response on the part of the United States is without risk. After all, in taking the decision that the Prime Minister did against a lot of domestic political opposition to once again resume some kind of a dialogue with Pakistan was also a big risk. Because if tomorrow some incident takes place in India, you can imagine what will be his political position. So no choice that either the United States of America makes or India makes is going to be without risk. How do you change the calculus? Or whether Pakistan will want to change its calculus, that's Pakistan's choice. You can only try and influence that calculus. You cannot be certain that, yes, you would have succeeded in doing that. because these are very deep-seated, perceptions that are there, which have been built over a number of years. So it's not easy. I agree. You mentioned the Chinese factor. Well, some conversation with China may be necessary. How does China see its own long-term future? Whether China's own security interests are best served by having some kind of assurance that here is a Pakistani army or here is a Pakistani establishment, which will always be very sensitive to Chinese concerns, and therefore we have no reason to, put any pressure on Pakistan. Or will it see its own long-term interests, particularly with respect to, say, Xinjiang, as also being impacted by what may be happening in Pakistan? Now, is that some conversation that can take place between US and China or India and China? That is something which perhaps one should be thinking about. If you are asking what is India prepared to do, well, India has already shown what it is prepared to do, because not only has it resumed the dialogue with Pakistan, but its reaction to what has happened in Abbottabad has not been, as some people may have been expecting, to slam the door shut. Because at least there is a sense in India that, I think there is a sense in India that here is a possible opening, a possible opportunity for that change in the strategic calculus to come. But India probably will not be able to do that by itself. We create the conditions for that. The choice eventually will be of Pakistan. I don't think that we can substitute that in any way, whether it's India or the United States.
Could you just turn that analysis around to extend it? How do you see Pakistan's calculus in the Indo-Pakistani dialogue right now? It's long been the case that the civilian government has been willing to embrace dialogue. The military has been seen to be hanging back. As the dialogue is resuming, what does Pakistan want out of it? And are the events of this week likely to change their thinking about the cost-benefit equation in, for example, granting MFN or taking other concrete steps to improve the relationship?
Well, I suspect that Pakistan will probably react by being quite amenable to taking this dialogue forward, and perhaps even granting MFN, because it relieves some of the pressure on Pakistan. But whether or not that will be the prelude to a more fundamental change in the manner in which Pakistan considers its interests vis-a-vis India, I don't know, frankly. Will Pakistan's calculus change with respect to, say, Kashmir? I don't think so. Will Pakistan stop thinking of Afghanistan as some kind of a strategic rear for Pakistan vis-a-vis India? Probably not. Because that's why I said that much of what we can achieve is probably a more manageable relationship rather than, as I said, a friendly relationship in which our security perceptions are in some way aligned. I don't think that alignment will take place for some time. And what you said about the economic and trade relationship, our calculation is that if we built up that kind of a dense economic interdependence, hopefully, that may help us bring about a change in the security dynamic as well. But that can't happen in a short time frame.
If I could just follow up on your remarks about China and to explore your sense of the relative valuation of the short-term versus long-term interests in China's mind. To be crude, China's short-term interest is clearly to keep America distracted, to keep India distracted by supporting Pakistani, let's also be crude, the double game. If that has value, but China's also facing, as we were discussing last night, China's also facing a massive sustainability crisis. It needs its nations on its periphery to be producing at world-class levels, and not. We're already seeing IMF commodity prices at their highest levels ever, and they're just going to continue going as the Asian middle class rises in both India and China. And so, is there a chance that China could see its long-term interest in all nations along its periphery, including Pakistan, as one of economic need, and specifically in agricultural and food production, where they're extraordinarily kind of behind the curve. And if so, could that be a place where American, Indian, and Chinese interests all intersect, and possibly create an opportunity for not squeezing the balloon and letting it squirt out? And do we have enough?
Well, that's a very positive script. I'm not very sure whether it will actually run according to that script. All the aspects that you are mentioning are already there in terms of the relationship, say, between India and China. I mentioned yesterday to you that as China's own infrastructure plans have matured, there is a huge capacity, huge overcapacity, which, if you're looking for a market, you have an India next door, which is now going to be spending huge sums of money on infrastructure. Already China is actually trying very hard to become part of that story. And that's not just a short-term commercial contract. You're looking at a longer-term relationship. So I would say that those elements are in place, but whether or not this will trump those short-term considerations, as a realist, I would say I'm not so sure. Which is the case, as I mentioned right in the beginning, with the United States as well. Will the United States look at the leverage that it has today, which is a perishable commodity, which may not last very long? Is it prepared to use that leverage, or at least think in terms of using that leverage, to try and bring about that shift, as I said, in the calculus in Islamabad? Or will it say, well, we have got them where we want them, and these are in the political cycle that we operate on, these are some of the things that would be very helpful in terms of the political objectives, and that is what we should try and do. That why should we worry about what happens in the long term? Could be a calculus. So it's very difficult to say which way the what would be the real trend in this. We'll just have to probably just wait and watch.
Thank you.
Because I think of events this week, we are peppering you with lots of questions about the South Asian region to the west. But there's a lot that's also going on in the region. If you look around India's periphery.
That is what I thought I would be speaking on.
You thought you would be speaking on that. I wonder if we can engage you on some of these questions. I mean, when we look at the region, that's the part of this region that I have responsibility for. I have to say it's been a tremendously exciting story. And if you look at what's taken place in South Asia, so the SAARC minus Afghanistan and Pakistan, we see now for the first time in more than a decade, all democratically elected governments. You've got countries that are making choices about post-conflict resolution. These are tough choices. When you were in Nepal, it was a totally different story. There's another path taking place now. Sri Lanka coming out of a very, very difficult conflict. Bangladesh in a very different place than it was even as recently as 2005, when people were very concerned about the future trajectory of the country. Bangladesh is also a country that I think offers a counterpoint to Bangladesh offers a kind of model for what happens when you make important policy choices about investing in women and children and economic development, and you end up with a country of 160 million people that's seeing rates of economic growth around 6%. So that's a pretty different kind of a story than elsewhere in the region. So I wonder if you can comment upon what you see as India's strategy in the coming, let's say, medium term, because there is something really good going on here in the region.
As I mentioned right in the beginning, that sometime around the turn of the century, India, which had a very different viewpoint, say, about SAARC, which was this is a ganging up of the small countries, against India. That was at least at the back of policymakers' mind. This was not such a great project. So you went along with it, but you were not really sort of fully committed to it. I think around 2000 or so, the mindset changed, and mindset changed because also there was a change in terms of our economic policy. A more open door policy with respect to trade, with respect to investment, and there was then a sense that can we, since we are now a very dynamic, rapidly growing economy, is there some way in which we can try and give a stake in our prosperity to our neighbors and see if that, as I mentioned, can help change the security mindset in the region? Because what is India's dilemma? If you look at, if we see what is India's strategic realm, that strategic realm is what we call the Indian subcontinent, or now politically correct way to say is South Asia. But there is no doubt that if we are looking at our overall security for want of a better word, security realm, it is the entire region. But while that is the case, you have a region which is politically divided. So the greatest challenge for India is how do you transcend those political divisions so that overall security perspective can somehow emerge? Or how India sees its security interests, that is something which gets somehow aligned with the security perspective of your neighbors. So what is the instrumentality that you can use to bring that about? Given the fact that the political divisions are there, they are a reality. There is a reality that India is a huge country. It is surrounded by small neighbors. No matter what you do, there will be anxiety, there will be fear or domination amongst your neighbors. If India was getting very prickly about that before, India is not getting very prickly about that now. Because it believes that size, which seemed to be a disadvantage earlier, size is perhaps an advantage today. Because you can open up, despite the fact that there are rigidities in the system, but by and large, the trend has been towards opening up India in terms of trade, in terms of investment, for the entire region. And if you look at what has happened with Sri Lanka, that's a case in point. The density of relationship which has been now put in place with Sri Lanka, especially with the southern states of India, the number of flights which take place between Sri Lanka and India today, there are more than 100 flights a week. Several of the cities in India are connected with Colombo. Colombo handles 70% of the maritime trade, container traffic headed for Indian ports. There are Sri Lankan companies which are investing in India, just as Indian companies are investing in Sri Lanka. So there is a very virtuous kind of a dynamic which is at work there, which helped, by the way, I can say, in dealing with the fallout of the ethnic conflict, which could have been very difficult for us to handle. So there is a sense in India that you can actually leverage your economic strength, your very economic size, to bring into place a very different dynamic in your relationship with your neighbors. That's also beginning to happen with Bangladesh. If you look at what has been happening in the last 4 to 5 years, there is a dramatic change. The trick lies in how can we make it irreversible, so that even if there are political changes in Dhaka, this will be ground reality which cannot be reversed anymore. Even I would say with Nepal, the important thing is that whatever may be the shadow play taking place, political shadow play taking place in Kathmandu, in terms of the nuts and bolts of the relationship, it is very strong. So I think sometime around the turn of the century, as I said, there was a sense that we need to move away. So India became a very enthusiastic supporter of SARC. And you will see that, I think 2001, Mr. Vajpayee's, the SARC summit in Kathmandu, was it 2001? Yeah, around that time. He came up with this idea of, a SARC common currency, a customs union, even talk about, sometime in the future there could even be a SARC parliament. That was a very major policy departure for an Indian political leader. And what Mr. Singh has done is he has followed up on that by making that statement, which I said, that we need to work in a manner that we can make all the borders in our region irrelevant. So if that kind of vision in some way can start being put in place, I think that would be a great story.
And if you asked the question, what is the instrumentality of that vision? And it sounds as if, as a practical matter, in the next 5 or 10 years, the greatest opportunities are going to be built around the example that you provided about Sri Lanka, which is going to be taking advantage of sources of economic integration that are already in place and just deepening those so that they create their own momentum. But are there specific opportunities with Bangladesh or Nepal that you think advance this vision as an engineering diagram now that it's been sort of articulated in sort of analogy to other regional programs of political and economic cooperation?
But as a practical matter, I would say, my own personal experience dealing with, Nepal or dealing with Sri Lanka, I think the change has been that from a very defensive kind of a mindset, this is our backyard, everybody keep out. If any major country has a presence here, it is somehow threatening to India. I think there has been a very fundamental shift in that mindset. So it is now not that this is a backyard, but here is a place where actually we can work together with our friends, the Americans. We can work together with the European Union, engage with them, so that we are on the same page in terms of taking this project forward. It worked very well, at least when I was in government, with respect to Nepal. It worked quite well also with respect to Sri Lanka, which was a very complicated issue to deal with. So I would hope that that habit of cooperation is further strengthened. I think it is to India's advantage.
Andrew?
Pakistan seems to be increasingly worried about its water future, to bring back to sustainability a bit, and a lot of
Even after the floods.
But a lot of that has to do with water management problems within Pakistan, especially in Punjab. But there does seem to be increasing concern about India's control of the headwaters, the possibility for damming the Indus. So I want to ask you a two-part question. First of all, do you think there's some opportunity to use that word productively towards maybe a renegotiation of the treaty to get concessions out of Pakistan on other trade security arrangements? And then more broadly, I'd just like you to talk a little bit about India's long-term water policy.
I frankly, I'm not very certain that this is the time when we can, even if we wish to, start engaging in a very comprehensive way on the issue of water security for the entire region. But here is what we have been able to do, particularly with respect to China, where, as you said, we have a very major, concern about the Trans-Himalayan rivers. We have been able to slowly build up, like building blocks, a collaborative kind of a framework. It is still very limited. It's a lot of it is about, information sharing. We have had flash floods, you are probably aware of, in some years ago. And as a result of that, we were able to talk to the Chinese, and they were reluctant to begin with. But we have put in place some information sharing, arrangements. We don't have a comprehensive umbrella kind of an agreement, and that is what we would like to put in place. But this is a work in progress. As you would imagine, this is all very much linked to the political relationship as well. So if you take, for example, what is happening with Bangladesh, things which were not possible before in terms of managing, the common rivers, it is becoming now possible because the political energy has been taken out of that dialogue. Will that be possible with Pakistan at some point? We certainly hope so. But realistically speaking, I don't think that at this point of time we can go beyond the so far, a very good structure that has been set in place by the Indus Water Treaties. It has so far worked. The mechanism to deal with differences between the two countries has been dealt with. And I see no reason why we should doubt that this is no longer useful and we need to go in for something else. When the time comes, we will look at it.
Mr. Ambassador, did you, sorry, Meena, do you want to ask a question?
Well, I just had a question to go back to China because, you have had so much experience there and being ambassador and India has had a rather sketchy history with its understanding of Chinese intentions. And this recent issue where China was requiring Kashmiris, giving them separate visas and just sort of exercising sort of dubious foreign policy sort of arrangements that brought into question Indian sovereignty issues. I was just wondering, we've never really ever resolved the border issue. The Chinese always step away from coming to any sort of firm commitments over that. What is your interpretation and understanding? You spent a lot of time with the Chinese. What is your understanding about what their intentions or game plan is with regards to all these little side games that they seem to play with India vis-a-vis Pakistan and the region?
I need to write a book on that. Yeah, I think I would reply to that by saying that it is always difficult to gauge intentions, and I think perhaps it is much better for us to determine in view of what we see as the behavior pattern on the Chinese side, what is a possible strategy that we can put in place. So what is the strategy that we have tried to put in place? That strategy is that if as an observer, if you ask me, what is the essential nature of India-China relations, I would say the essential nature of this relationship is adversarial. It is competitive. Having said that, there are a lot of areas where we also have certain convergent interests. Those convergent interests certainly emerge when, for example, we are working together in, say, WTO, we are working together in climate change negotiations, even in terms of some regional issues. There is a willingness on the part of China to work together with us. The trick for us lies in how do we manage this relationship so that we are able to build upon some of those areas of convergence, some of those areas where we have certain common interests, and how do we ensure that whatever is the competitive element in the relationship or the adversarial element in the relationship does not spill over into confrontation, does not spill over into armed conflict at the worst. So it's a complicated sort of management strategy. Sometimes it may seem as if it is not quite working the way we would want to. But by and large, I would say that both countries have actually been following this kind of an approach. On the Indian side, I think the important thing is, in my view, I don't know whether the government looks at it like that, but my view is that you should be very clear what your red lines are. So, the Kashmir, visa issue was a red line. Or for China to say the Indian Prime Minister must not visit Arunachal Pradesh, or the Dalai Lama cannot visit Arunachal Pradesh. Sorry, there are lines which we will not cross. Sometimes that does put a considerable amount of pressure on India. But so far, I think we have been able to manage those kind of confrontations not too badly. The other good thing is that, of course, there is a very dynamic economic and trade relationship which has been developing between the two countries. It does raise some anxieties in India, but by and large, it has been a positive factor in the relationship. So I mentioned to you the Chinese interest in taking part in India's infrastructure development, because they see a huge market for them. Now, trick for us is, can we leverage that to be able to also somehow improve the political relationship? That is something that you have to look at. At the same time, make certain that your economy is not in some way undermined because of this flood of Chinese goods. It's a complicated game. What our experience has been that the political leadership in both countries have been engaging very regularly, whether it is in terms of high-level annual visits which have been taking place, or meetings which have been taking place quite regularly on the sidelines of multilateral conferences and meetings. And now there are several, as you can see, whether it is the BRICS or whether it is ASEAN, the East Asia Summit or the United Nations. So there are number of occasions where you engage with China at the leadership level. And this has played a very important role in sort of keeping the relationship on an even keel. Doubts are, of course, now China is going into a leadership transition. I think not only India, but this is something which perhaps engages the attention of all countries which have major sort of engagement with China. What will be the attitude of the new leadership? Will it be more nationalistic in its approach? Will it be more open-minded? Will it be more liberal? These are questions which are very difficult to answer today. But in the meantime, we see, of course, a greater assertiveness on the part of China. Perhaps it may be because people say that in this transition, the PLA has increased its salience. Maybe that is true. So we have to watch very carefully how things evolve in China. But I think the challenge for us will be the same. How do we manage this very complex relationship in a manner that it doesn't create problems for us?
We're just about out of time. So one or two more questions, if anyone else wants to ask.
Ambassador, sorry to drag you back to Ahmedabad, but being a journalist, of course, we always look for the news of the day. Perhaps the greatest fear in Delhi, in Washington, and perhaps even in Islamabad is another Mumbai. And in the current immediate aftermath of the Osama killing, there seems to be a good cop, bad cop type of approach in Washington. You get John Brennan talking about the fact that it's inconceivable that there wasn't a support network. But over at the State Department, I guess they don't want to rub it in. And even yesterday's hearing, Kerry and Lugar were talking about the fact that you just cannot forsake Pakistan, etc. You spoke about the fact that it's a vindication vis-a-vis India's policy that there was always sort of a segmentation in terms of the war against terrorism, and that Pakistan had been helpful vis-a-vis Al-Qaeda.
That's the impression.
Yeah, even though I guess the biggest prize in terms of Osama wasn't handed over, even though JSM and all that was done in Pakistan. Is there a danger here that this perhaps, because Washington and a few others also have given sort of the institutional Pakistan the benefit of the doubt in terms of perhaps they had no knowledge. Is there a danger that there may be fissures in the Pakistani intelligence, Pakistani military, in terms of mid-level, high-level, etc.? And if there are those fissures, it could be very dangerous and very insidious vis-a-vis the entire region.
What can I say?
Something profound.
No, I mean those what you are saying, those risks are certainly there. All one can hope for is that it doesn't result in some unfortunate incident which then sets us all back.
Absolutely.
And it will not be only a problem for India. I think it's wrong to look at some of these issues as somehow they are India-specific. They are not India-specific. They have a major impact on regional security. They have a major impact on global security. So,
and there is a great fear.
Yeah. So it is not something that we can sort out ourselves. This is something which will require the international community itself to take a call as to how do you deal with this danger. All I can say is that as far as India is concerned, we will certainly try from our side the best that we can to help nudge the process in as positive a direction as is possible. Whether that will actually happen or not, I don't know. Much will depend upon how Pakistan reacts.
As we draw to a close, let me just ask one last question about a completely different subject, one that is obviously of great importance, but we haven't discussed at all. Did you ever serve in an Arab country during your career? Well, nonetheless, you are a man of global affairs. And we are in the last 6 weeks of the Arab Spring. And I was reading, as I do, of course, I'm sure as you do every day, another comment this morning about the events in Libya and Syria, this time in the Financial Times. And the writer was making the case that this truly will be remembered in 10 or 15 years as significant as the events that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 were for Europe. And I found myself reflecting on that. Really? Do we think so? Do we think in 10 or 15 years that the consequences of this beginning, as we can see it now, and the counter reaction as we see it in Damascus and Tripoli, might produce changes in global affairs as in any way comparable to the reunification of Europe? What's your estimate of where this is going and how it will be remembered?
You know, I was asked some weeks ago to analyze the current developments, and I said that there were, for many years, there were two interconnected balances which kept some kind of a peace in the region. One was the internal balance in the region itself. So you have the major regional powers, which is Iraq, you have Iran, you have Saudi Arabia, and you have Egypt. These are the four sort of pillars of the region. And then you have the balance which has been provided by the network of alliances which the United States has in the region, and Israel fits into that particular framework. I think what has happened is that number one, that internal balance has broken down, started with what happened in Iraq, thanks to the United States looking at its own interests in a somewhat, I think, short-term framework, and that's actually led to if you see from that point onwards, there have been forces which have been unleashed which are really playing themselves out. So that internal balance is now getting very badly strained, and then the network of alliances are breaking down. So President Obama has talked about an orderly transition. I'm afraid the way things are moving, I can't see an orderly transition. It will be a very messy transition. All that we can hope for is that by and large the trend will be towards more democratic states, more representative states, some future equilibrium which may emerge. But I think we will, my sense is that we will go through a rather messy period. So you see what has happened, for example, with the Hamas, Fatah, coming together. Who has brokered it? The one country which perhaps the US thought, even if there is a transition, the basic alliance remains intact because the Egyptian army is the most important force there. That assumption is not necessarily holding. Secondly, if an assumption was made that the democratization process is actually cutting off space for more fundamentalist, Islamic elements, not necessarily the case. So you see, again, that is cropping up in places like Egypt. It will probably crop up in other places too. There may be a support for the rebels in the eastern part of Libya, but there are some strange characters in that group. So I think we have to be realistic. Each country is different. So I think a kind of a generalized kind of an assessment is not possible. I think you have to look at each country. I'm not an expert, but my experience tells me that one should not make those kind of generalizations. And secondly, I think one has to be prepared for a very difficult ride. The one danger that I hope does not come about, because of that internal balance that I was mentioning. Saudi Arabia on one side and Shia Iran on the other side. The sort of buffer in between is getting squeezed. Now, what has happened in Bahrain, whatever else may be the consequence of that, but one of the consequences is that the space between Iran and Saudi Arabia is now shrunk. Now, if you are going to have, God forbid, a kind of a sectarian conflict which overlays the many other instabilities which are plaguing the region, it would be very dangerous. And certainly, we in India would be, feel very threatened by those developments. So I don't know whether that's a satisfactory answer.
Yes, no, it's certainly. You described yourself as a realist. I think you proved it with that answer. So thank you very, very much for the
Is there anything that you would like?
for the wide range, intelligence, and candor that you were able to bring to this conversation. It probably helps to be a former Foreign Secretary.
Everything that I have said is my personal.
Yes, of course, yes. Yeah. Well, we're refreshed by it and appreciative of it as well. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.